Welcome to the Land, your bet sports betting show. Thursday night football got the Bengals in Baltimore taking on the Ravens with a nice 53.5 point total in this one. Do have some rain in the forecast, so want to make sure you know what kind of rain we're talking about here. How hard is that rain going to be coming down? Obviously going to impact a lot of stuff here for the pass game, which we'll definitely talk about with my 8 or 9 player prop projections that we have in here for you guys to help you find your best bets. If that all sounds good to you, go ahead and give that video a like. Let's get right into it. Part of the reason we have this total so high is the fact that these offenses are very good against the weaknesses of the opposing defense. Starting with this Bengals offense, 7th in passing yards and 4th in pass EPA. I don't think we need to beat a dead horse into the ground anymore, but I'll mention once again, Baltimore is the worst pass defense in terms of yards allowed, 4th worst in terms of their pass EPA, and in part because they're so good against the run, and they do stink against the pass, but they're so good against the run that teams are forced to pass way more, so that's why they're obviously dead last in passing yards as a result, but first in allowing rushing yards and 3rd in rush EPA. The Bengals not really able to get much push with their offensive line. They're about 17th in adjusted yards before contact. At times, they've looked good this season when they've been a little bit healthy, but to be honest, this is not an offensive line that you expect to get much push against this Baltimore defensive line, as we know. And Baltimore, interestingly, doesn't get that much pressure on the quarterback. They're in the bottom 5 in terms of pressure percentage, and they don't blitz very often either, but they don't really need to because this Baltimore defense doesn't really get much pressure. They're 25th in pressure percentage. That's going to be a huge problem. Once again, Joe Burrow carved them up last game for 5 tutties, and I expect him to have another big game here. He had close to 400 yards in the last one, but if you're going to give him time to sit back there and throw without getting pressure, he's going to carve you apart. On the other side of the ball, we've probably given too much flack to the Bengals defense. They're not as bad as advertised. They did give up a few scores, but they had a defensive touchdown the Raiders did last week in that win for the Bengals. So I'm not holding too much against them, but they are a very bad run defense. 30th in rush EPA. They don't get much push with their line. The Ravens are going to be top 3 in pretty much every relevant rushing category on offense. And even in pass yards, they've been incredible. Now you've got Deontay Johnson in there. You've got a much healthier Mark Andrews starting to look like himself. Zay Flowers coming into his own, trying to sort of wrangle in a top 20 wide receiver nomination for himself with the yards that he's getting and the attempts and everything. So I do think this Ravens offense is going to hum against a very bad Bengals defense. Joe Burrow in this one, I'm looking to get his 2+ TDs in there and make it a safe little same game parlay with his alt yards. So what I'm looking at here is whether or not this weather is going to impact his ability to pass too much. If you see things a little bit nasty and this weather forecast comes down and it's looking like a legit thunderstorm, might be better to go 200+ yards with the 2 TDs for Joe. If not, if you still think this is going to be a slightly better weather game, then I think we get this at 250 and add that to the 2+ TDs for Joe Burrow, which he's gone over in 6 of 8 games this season. And you're going to look at a very high point total. If you have a decent amount of good weather in this game, then yeah, this should be at about 50 points once again with the way these two teams play. And the Bengals, whether they're having to come from behind or are already leading, they're much better passing the ball against this team. It's really a good reason for taking some short yardage guys in this one. And Jamar Chase is probably a good look as well. We're going to get into that right now. Before Jamar Chase, Chase Brown. So we'll go with receiving yards because that is what you do against the Ravens when you're a running back. You don't get rushing yards. Just that simple. I'll say it once more. Number 1 rush defense, last in pass defense as far as the yardage goes. And they're giving up the 4th most receiving yards to the running back position at about 46 per game. Chase Brown, incredible receiving back, as we know. And we'll be playing without Zach Moss once again. So this is a steal. If you get this under about 25 yards to go to the over for Chase Brown, love that bet, especially because even though Khalil Herbert's in town now to sort of help out Brown with the fact that Zach Moss doesn't play very much anymore because of his injuries, he's just got in here a week ago for Khalil Herbert. So nothing to worry about in terms of his usage and taking some snaps from Chase Brown. I'm sure they'll work him in here and there, but for the most part, this team's going to be passing the ball way more than running it. So it just doesn't seem worth it to take anything around rushing attempts or yards for Chase Brown, but the receiving will be there. He's going to have to get involved in the pass game at this point. 9 targets in the last 2 weeks in a very similar context to the game that he's coming into right now. So love him to get the receiving yards anywhere under 25 tonight. Jamar Chase hasn't had too many 100-yard games this year, but he's had a couple of nasty breakout games, and he is getting targeted a ton. So let's say there is a negative game script for him. Great. Then we know they're going to be passing. Let's say there isn't a negative game script for him. Great. I still think that they're going to be passing. And Jamar Chase is the kind of guy that you either send down on a go route and just hit him 40 yards down the field, or feel free to just put him in a screen or any kind of bubble play, and you're going to get him with the ability to get yards after catch with the effectiveness of a really, really good running back, to be honest. So Jamar Chase is a guy that doesn't really matter what the game script is. He's going to get involved, especially with T. Higgins out. And I don't really trust Yoshiva at this point. I'm not really, we'll talk about him in a second as well, but he's not a guy that's been involved in the pass game. And I don't think that's going to increase at all when you've got guys like Jamar Chase and also Mike Gesicki. So I don't mind both of those players. I don't have anything else for Mike Gesicki other than he's been targeted a ton. There's no backup tight end now for the Bengals. And Gesicki anywhere around 55 to 60 yards is probably going to be another good play, coming off 100 yards in that one. But still think Jamar Chase is going to get targeted a ton because this Ravens defense is so bad on the outside that you can get a lot of yards in one play. That's where Jamar Chase comes in. So I think the yards are great for him, but if you'd rather take Gesicki or you'd take both for 50 plus or something to that effect, I think that there's going to be a lot of passing yards to go around. So both those guys are good for overs. Andres Yoshivas, said that right? Yoshivash. Let's go with that. I'm going under. I'm actually fading a receiver in a game against the Ravens. Seems really stupid, but we're at 2.5 receptions, and he has not been involved enough at all to get 3 receptions. He's only done it twice. Everything that he did successfully came in the first 3 weeks of the season. He had 17 targets in those first 3 weeks. And I know T. Higgins was very limited only in one of those games, but still, even since then, T. Higgins has missed 2 games, and we still haven't seen 3+ receptions for Yoshivash. So I'm going to continue to fade him. We're talking about 14 targets over the last 6 weeks. Let that sink in. Very few targets, many games in there where he didn't even get targeted 3 times. So obviously he couldn't get 3 receptions. The TDs are gone as well for him. You saw that level of involvement in the offense at the beginning of the season. We thought this was the breakout season for him, and there's just too many weapons in front of him and too many guys that Burrow would prefer throwing to, including Chase Brown at this point. Other side of the ball, looking at Lamar, and I think we have an advantage here, massive advantage on the rushing to fade it for Lamar Jackson. If you didn't know, Lamar's knee is a little bit banged up, just isn't right. We saw him only run the ball 3 times versus a Denver team that puts a lot of pressure on the quarterback and has a very good pass defense. Lamar stood back in the pocket, carved it up for 280 yards. I think he's going to have a lot more success passing the ball today because he's not even going to try to run. That's part of the reason you bring Derrick Henry in, is you've got a very durable back that you don't need to rely on Lamar come weeks 10 and later so that he's available in week 19 and 20 for the actual playoffs, right? So that's going to be what we see moving down the stretch here for Lamar. I would be very shocked if John Harbaugh is running him more than like 3 to 4 times per game, right? We only saw the 3 attempts last week. He's only gone over 49.5 rushing yards once in his last 4 games anyway. So I think that trend towards getting him into the passing game a lot more and rushing him fewer times per game, that started in the last 4 weeks. And then you add a guy like Deontay Johnson, right? And now he's got even more weapons to work with. You've got a big, really solid possession wide receiver who also had a 10.5-yard ADOT when he was with a poo-poo Panthers offense in Deontay Johnson. You've got Mark Andrews coming back into form as well. And obviously we know Derrick Henry can take the rushing load off of his shoulders. So I don't think he's going to need to rush. So I'm happy to take him under the rushing yards at 50. Happy to take him under the rush attempts at about 8 or 9.5. So who is going to run the ball? Derrick Henry. Maybe you get some Justice Hill in there as well to relieve Henry a little bit when he needs a breather as well. But we know how durable this man is. I'm starting to think of him as like a top 5 back all time. Like it's getting to the point where Derrick Henry needs to be discussed in the conversation of that with that level of respect. But he's looking at 6.1 yards per carry in week 5 versus Cincy. That tells you what you need to know. Now, granted, he broke off a big run, was quiet for a good amount of that game, and then boom, all of a sudden he's at like 150 yards. You're like, what? He just had 40 yards rushing for like 3 quarters, and then bang, it's over. And granted, the overtime helped him, but I would not be fading Derrick Henry in this situation. I would be going probably for just like 100+ yards. He's going to be at around 88, 90 yards in terms of his player prop for the rushing here. But unless I need to explain it again, this Bengals rush defense is terrible. 30th in rush EPA, not getting much push on the defensive line to get into the backfield and hit these ball carriers. And if you don't get, even if you do hit Derrick Henry in the backfield, there's no guarantee you're going to bring him down there. And if you don't touch him for a couple yards, which obviously the Ravens have the best adjusted yards before contact, Derrick Henry is hitting about 3 yards per carry before anyone touches him. Not that they really are able to bring him down on the first touch anyway. So I think this is another good opportunity to take advantage of a guy who's going to get 20 carries because Lamar is just not a guy they need to give the ball to on the ground right now. Finding receivers in this Ravens offense now, look, Zay Flowers is probably going to go off again. I would imagine that he's going to have another big game. There's no reason to fade the man who is Lamar's favorite target. But there's a couple other guys we got to talk about, and Deontay Johnson's one of them, and we're still getting value. Now, I would never have taken him last week. He came in, didn't even have a full week worth of practice to get integrated into the offense, is the word I'm looking for, with Lamar. So that was not the time to take him. Week 2, though, getting closer, and at 21.5, 23.5 yards is what I'm seeing for his receiving yards, still up right now as I'm recording this on Thursday morning. You're still getting value there, even though he only had 16 snaps last week. It was just to get him on the field. Now he's going to be looking at least double that amount of snaps. Got to be looking at about 3 to 4 targets to at least get him in the offense. I'm very confident that they have a couple packages and plays scripted for him, and you're going to see Lamar lock onto him for a couple plays because they know that they need to get the ball in his hands to get him going over the course of the last 7 or 8 weeks so that they're ready for him to be a legit weapon in the playoffs. That's why they got him. And that he's a really awesome receiver for them because there's nobody else like him. Like, Rashad Bateman might try to be like him, not the possession physical type of wide receiver that Deontay Johnson is. Like, this is a man that you do not want to have to try to tackle once he has the ball in his hands. And he's already running down the field about 10 yards with a really nice average depth of target. So with Lamar's bad knee, a few more passes, make sure you get the ball in this man's hands. I see him for about 3 receptions for around 30 yards in this one. So anything under that is going to be a really nice over. I mentioned Zay Flowers is still a really good bet, but I'm going to at least look at Mark Andrews here and talk about the anytime touchdown for him because I think this is a really good weapon that they're finally using once again, right? 4 touchdowns in the last 4 weeks. Prior to that, 0 touchdowns. The targets have gone way up. We've got Isaiah Likely out as well in this one, the other tight end who does eat into some of his usage when they're both out there. Likely's not available in this one. And this Cincinnati defense, as bad as it is really bad against tight ends. 7th most yards, 2nd most TDs allowed to that position right now on the season. So I think Mark Andrews continues to sort of keep going upwards and trending in the right direction. Granted, the yards are not going to necessarily get up to about 60 to 70, which a lot of fantasy owners probably hoped would be the case for him this year, but he's still a wonderful red zone target, especially because he's the biggest dude out there. We'll see if Deontay Johnson eats into some of that, but Zay Flowers, although he's gotten a decent amount of red zone targets, isn't the threat down there that Mark Andrews is. So he'll continue to eat up a lot of red zone targets. One more reminder for you guys, we got outlier.bet in case you do want a free trial for that. Check out the description of the video, get a link in there so you can get 7 free days and then go ahead and see if you like this platform. But this is what I'm using on the live show every day and then the sort of home base and one-stop shop that I use to make sure I'm finding value on all these plays that I'm putting out with you guys. But that is all the time I have for you. Make sure to go ahead and subscribe and like that video if you would, if you're getting anything out of this stuff. And until I see y'all next, happy betting.